Welcome to the Real Estate Roundtable podcast, where we sit down with some of the most successful real estate agents, brokers, and team leaders to learn about their journeys in this industry. I'm your host, Art Bettuzzi, and as a seasoned real estate agent of 29 years, I'm always fascinated by the stories of how others found success in this business. On this podcast, we'll be talking to our guests about the obstacles they overcame, the lessons they learned, and the tips and strategies they're using in today's ever-changing market. Whether you're a real estate agent, broker, team leader, investor, or just someone interested in real estate, you're in the right place. Our guests come from a variety of backgrounds, and they all have unique insights to share. We want to have fun with these interviews, but we also want to make sure that you come away with actionable tips that you can implement in your own business. New episodes will be released weekly, so be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us on the Real Estate Roundtable podcast. Let's get started. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Real Estate Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, Art Bettuzzi, and I'm joined today by the designated managing broker of Realtopia Real Estate in Lockport, Illinois, Ashley York. Now, I've known Ashley a couple, 3-4 years now, I think, at this point. And Ashley is actually one of the founders of her company. I'm going to let her tell you her origin story. But I can tell you from the times that I've interacted with Ashley over these years, she's always impressed me as somebody that's very level-headed, somebody that doesn't go to one extreme or the other when it comes to what's going on in our industry, what's going on in her business. I mean, she's Ash, I think you're one of those people I think of as whatever comes, we're going to deal with it. Is that a fair statement?
100%. It's my motto.
Nothing seems to bother you too much.
I wouldn't say that, but I just like to prepare for, every outcome. So in life, that's just how I roll. Because, what's the point of worrying about something until you know how it's going to affect you, You can go through all the scenarios and be prepared, but no sense in getting worked up because it could end up totally fine.
Absolutely. Well, welcome. I know I went off sideways there, but welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And one of the reasons that I asked Ashley to be on the podcast is because of everything that's going on in our industry and with the lawsuits that people are talking about and how it's going to affect us day to day. And I was telling Ashley before we started that one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to her is because in following her and her company on the socials, I've seen how she's addressed a lot of the issues that have come up. And like I said, I think she's got a very level-headed approach to what's going on in Illinois specifically, but also what's going on nationally. So we are going to talk about all of that coming up here. But first, as always, I like to start out by asking you, what got you into real estate, Ashley?
So I always had commission jobs, which is interesting. Even back in high school, I worked at Carson's and I sold shoes and got like a little commission. And I always thought it was really exciting because, if I'm working hard, the harder I work, the more shoes I sell. it would be an extra $30 on my check. And I also sold baby furniture. That was commission. So, when I went to school, I did the whole internship thing. I went to DePaul downtown. I actually commuted and I was like, man, this is like not the life I want to live, getting up every day at, 4:30 in the morning, taking the train, being in an office all day long, getting home at like 6:00 at night. I'm like, yeah, this is not for me. So I always wanted to work for myself. Like even as a kid, I feel like I would be begging my parents to do chores to get money. And like, I always just wanted to like come up with these business concepts on my own. So I actually had a family member who was in real estate and, always kind of talked about it. And I looked at it as like, this is a path that I could totally take. It's, relatively, I won't say like easy to get into, but I mean, it's attainable, doing the studying and passing the class. I did fail my first time. So I always tell people, don't ever let that stop you, because here I am as a managing broker. I mean, just the test is hard. It's very hard and not a determining factor of your success by any means. But yeah, I just think that real estate is one of those careers. It's very demanding. It's very hard, but you also get out of it what you put into it, which I love. And I just find it very motivating, because if I want to give it my all and work really hard, then I can, make a good living for myself. And versus, I could give it my all at a corporate job and you just get the same paycheck every 2 weeks. So for me, I think that was a big part of the motivation, as well as obviously the flexible schedule, somewhat flexible, but you could have somewhat control over your time, and you're just doing different things every day. You're walking through different houses, which going through houses will never get old. I don't care how many years you've been in real estate, getting to go through houses is just one of the best things. It's just so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just exciting, I guess, and just seeing how different people live and meeting new people. It's just an exciting like career to be in.
So you always had this entrepreneurial vein, and then you decided when to jump into real estate.
So it was like right after college. Like I said, I had that internship experience. I always had a job. I always worked like very young. So I had experienced a lot of different jobs, and I did it pretty much right out of college. And I got licensed. I was working at the time at a financial advisor's office. I actually ended up going down to part-time hours once I got licensed. I was in my early 20s, like right out of college. And of course, the market was terrible. And everyone's like, why is she getting into real estate? But I was young and I had all these first-time buyers, all my friends, buying their first place. And I was just right and left doing short sales, foreclosures, Fannie Mae Home Path homes, Freddie Mac home steps, HUD homes. I mean, I just was this expert doing these deals for, $50,000. But I think, I had the follow-up. So I followed up, I stayed on top of it. So then a couple years down the road, got your starter home, want to maybe move up to, single family, whatever it may be, then you're getting a buy sell, so then it's like, if you keep in touch and do that. So I just kind of built off of it. And for me, all these agents were exiting the business at that time, which like we're parallel kind of seeing that now. I was like taking the opportunity with all the buyers that were not contingent, that had these flexible timelines, living with their parents, to be able to buy these, short sales. And so it was mostly buyers, but then obviously a couple of years in, I didn't have listings right away because I was so young. And I do think it's hard when you're young to be taken seriously. But once you get, your listing, like I would do expired listings every day. That was my thing. That was my jam. Like I would send out letters. I would go door knocking, like me and another agent would pair up and we would just go knock on the doors of expireds. And it was just fun to build a business, so it just really kind of like snowballed from there.
So wait, what year, when you were saying the downturn, what year did you jump in?
So I got in 2009. So
really?
It was,
okay. So
yeah, yeah, it was like not, but like I said, I took it to my advantage. And I mean, I was super motivated. Every single day, I mean, I gave it my all. And like I think probably almost like over 20 transactions, I believe, my first year, which was huge. Wow. But like I said, I just had the right clientele at the time. I had all the buyers and, it was great.
Right. Well, and I always say the people who got their licenses in 2008, 2009, 2010, if they're still in the business today, it's because you learned how to sell. You weren't an order taker in those years. You learned how to solve problems. And that sounds like what you did. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, there was just countless times. I mean, you're negotiating obviously gets really good, because the last couple of years, it's so hard for agents to relate, because it's just been, super busy. my agents ask for advice about like comps, and I'm like, what are comps? Like, I mean, people are just pulling all these random things out to try to win multiple offer situations. You're seeing crazy things. Back then, it really truly was like, I'm looking at comps, I'm looking at dollar per square foot. I'm like really, presenting this whole offer. Like there's just a lot of negotiation that you do learn in a market like that. And even for listings, now we're kind of like starting to see that a little more. But for a while, I mean, let's be honest, like you put it in the MLS and like you were getting flooded with buyers. But, I always tell my agents, I'm like, it's crazy because I would have these nice listings back in the day, like, 6 months of working so hard, taking all the calls from the seller, marketing it, holding broker opens, holding open houses, doing absolutely everything in your power to get it sold, even social media, and then it doesn't sell, and then it expires, and then you literally make $0, so it's hard, but you learn like what's effective selling, what, how to get the property out there, how to promote it, which is really something we haven't had to do a lot of in the last couple of years.
100%. I think that so many people think that what we do is put a sign in the ground and just wait for all these calls, and you'll get 5 offers and on, including, by the way, sellers. I mean, a lot of sellers are like, well, what do I even need you for? Because I'll stick my own for sale sign and people come running to me. Right. But
for sure. But I'll be honest, multiple offers is also, it's hard, like as an agent to stay organized and to navigate that. I mean, if you have a listing where you get 12 offers, that's a lot. I feel like on a seller, that's a lot to go through. And then it's like, there's different terms. What do these terms mean? Like, I have like a spreadsheet that we use in the office here. And like, how do you explain that? Yeah, it's great. But I feel like a seller, like it's really could be overwhelming because again, we do this every day. So there's so much value in our experience and all of the situations that we've seen throughout the years. Like that's what people are paying for. Like that is our value. Because the average, unless you're an investor, like buying and selling all the time, your average home buyer, I mean, if you haven't bought in 10 years, not only are there like law changes, there's just so many different things that we day to day see this. So we are the level-headed one that like can keep the transaction together. So that's just so much of our value comes from our experience,
Right. Absolutely. And I think too that when people being sellers and or buyers, when they're working with us, if they avail themselves of that experience, if they listen to some degree to the advice, because you get some people who are mavericks who I want to do it my own way. Okay, well, here's the ramifications of doing it A, B, or C. Sometimes people just need that put in front of them, and then it's your choice. And we are here to implement your choice, but let's make sure you're making an informed decision.
100%. And, a lot of times they do make the wrong choice. I mean, it's our job, like you said, we educate them, right? So, I've obviously had all kinds of difficult sellers and buyers. And it's like, hey, I've seen this before. Here's what could happen. Here's, what my advice is. They still want to go against your advice. Yes, a lot of times things happen. Like I've had, clients, for example, we have a cash offer, we have a contingent on sale offer. So of course my advice is, okay, well, cash, there's not a financing contingency. It's not contingent on another home closing. Even though it's a little bit lower, in my personal opinion, if it was my personal home, I would probably consider the cash over this contingent on sale. Of course, I've had this happen, had clients, they're like, well, this is 10,000 more. I want to take this. Totally understand. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. And hate to say it, but literally that deal fell apart. The lender couldn't get their contingent on sale together. So, here we are like 2 months later, all these mortgage payments. And again, like not like, oh, I told you so, but these things happen. It's in my experience. I've seen it. We've all seen deals fall apart at the closing table. We've seen some of the worst things, that outcomes that could happen. So just sharing that and giving that experience, I think is just, there's so much value there because if buyers and sellers, a lot of times like emotions are so high. So if they're directly trying to do these deals together, I feel like so many deals would die just from like emotions alone, because like we are so many times just acting as therapists on the phone. Listen, I know that, you don't like this person's personality or their negotiating style and you're mad, but at the end of the day, you need to move out of state for work. This is the situation. It's like we bring them back to reality, and then obviously tensions ease. So I feel like that is a lot of like, we're buffers, right? Like in between buyer and seller. And I feel like that's really important because I've seen so many deals almost fall apart when we bring them back to reality. And, we just remind them of their end goal, which is important because sometimes they get lost in the details and don't remember why they chose this offer.
Exactly. It's funny that you say it that way because I had a class this week that I was teaching, and one of the examples is the seller doesn't really like the buyer. And one of the students was like, well, what does that mean? Isn't that them being discriminatory? I'm like, no. It didn't say why they didn't like the buyer. They're like, well, what seller would say I don't like the buyer? And I'm like, oh, you are going to be surprised when you get out there. Because like you said, it is emotional. I mean, I once had a deal blow up because the seller overheard the buyer dissing their orange shag carpeting. They went, oh my God, who picked this orange shag carpeting? And the seller, we put an offer seller, I'm not selling to those people because they made fun of my carpet.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And so it's like, people don't understand. Right.
Well, and on that note, it's funny you say that because as a buyer's agent, I feel like that's also, we have seen so many homes and renovations and different things. So a lot of times it's so funny because especially now I've seen such a shift. Buyers can't look past certain things. Like if there's carpeting or if there's a paint color or even like furniture that they don't like. And I'm like, listen, this furniture doesn't even stay. So a lot of times, if we're helping them find something, we can give some good perspective as well of things that we've seen. For example, like I love the Forester model home when people knock out that wall between the kitchen and the dining room. I've seen some really nicely done, making it an open concept. So there's certain things that we've seen, we can show them. And sometimes buyers might not consider a certain property, but we can open their eyes to the possibilities. So I feel like that in itself is pretty valuable too, because we're really helping them identify, like, here's your goals. This can meet your goals if you do X, Y, Z. But it is hard because I feel like everyone wants turnkey. And in the market that we're in now, when it's like slim pickings and, the nice houses are getting multiple offers still. I mean, it's still happening. We're still seeing appraisal gap waivers. Like, it's crazy.
Oh, really? You're still seeing appraisal gap waivers?
In lower price points, yes. I would say like the 300-400 range and below is still nuts from what we're seeing. I'm definitely seeing, more listings, at least at our office, coming on the market, but it's more the higher priced homes now that I feel like are sitting a little bit longer because we weren't seeing market time on anything for a couple years. And now it's like, oh, market time. Okay, we're back to that.
Well, one of my students had a client recently who was so sure their house was going to sell so quickly. They're like, we're going to put it way up here. And they had a place to be, right? They had some place to be. And when they didn't get an offer in about 8 days, they started to freak out. And they're like, yeah. How much should we drop it? How much? And, the broker said, you should really go to where I told you to go in the first place. Sure enough, they drop it to that. They get an offer within 3 or 4 days, and they end up closing, 4 or 5 weeks later. So, yeah, I the experience that people are bringing to this, to buyers and sellers, I think is paramount to the seller actually getting what they want or a buyer getting what they want.
I think that's also a big like training shift right now, because part of the struggle that we're seeing is like if an agent did get in during the COVID boom, it's like you have to almost relearn how to do real estate from the beginning. Because when I was giving advice on, again, there's no comps. If you're putting in an offer and there's multiple offers, like here's all the stops you're going to pull out. It doesn't really matter on the price. That's what's hard. We can't really counsel a client because we don't know what other people are willing to do. I mean, we've seen it all from cash offers going 30, 40,000 above the list price. So, we obviously don't have a crystal ball, but now that things are starting to shift a little bit more, it's almost like a whole brand new training for, these agents that have only been doing this for a couple of years, because now we need to relearn how to appropriately price our listings, because previously, you could do that inflated price and probably get what you want, but now it's like, okay, let's come a little bit back to reality. Interestingly enough too, though, we were just talking about this yesterday, we're seeing a lot of appraisals coming in higher than what the negotiated contract price is, which is very interesting. And then actually one of our agents just had an appraisal waiver yesterday. So it's like the prices are still up there, but now it's like the buyer demand has like fallen a little bit. So it's like we're just in an interesting place to like learn how to negotiate in a different way.
Right. Well, in a way that's been around for decades, really. I mean, again, I remember the early 2000s. It was very similar to what it was in 2020, 2021. I mean, again, people would just be running in and going, yeah, I want this. It's a cycle. I mean, I think COVID definitely shortened the cycle in terms of people wanting to get it very quickly. And we had all that demand. I personally think people were sick of sitting at home with their family and going, this house is too small. We got to find a bigger house. Right.
Well, and like think about all the people that all of a sudden now they're 100% remote with their job. So they have these opportunities. Like I could move out to the country. I could move to another state. I could, I need this home office now because this is my new life. So I feel like there was a lot of interesting shift of that. Because even during COVID, I always thought about people that were like stuck in these high rises, and people like that. I feel like there was like kind of a shift for a while of like city living to like suburban, I have a backyard, I have space. It was just interesting because it was kind of like those conditions, we've obviously never seen anything like that before. So people's needs like dramatically shifted. And I feel like it was just this like rush of all these transactions.
And we had a couple of good years for sure. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. So at what point then did you decide to start your own company? How'd that come about?
I would say, so a little bit of my background, I actually got my degree in finance, but I did MIS, Management Information Systems. So I learned a lot about like technology and, coding a website, all these different things. So for me, a lot of like the technology that I was offered from, big corporate name, I just wasn't really into. I always did my own thing. So whether it was like building my own website, doing my own social media, I was never an agent who liked all of the corporate marketing and like totally get it. Some people do that, but even now in my email inbox, I'll get the same exact email from, 4 or 5 different agents. And it's just like, I never did that stuff. So for me, I was always doing my own thing. Obviously, my husband, Andy, he's in technology. So we always just did a lot of that. And actually, so a couple years into real estate, because I was so busy and getting all these referrals, and then I was getting married, it was so demanding. And then Kristen, my cousin, we were talking and she's like, hey, like, how's the real estate market? And she just randomly texted me one day. So I was like, you should just get licensed and join me. So she actually got licensed first. And then her and I kind of like did this partner team thing. And it was actually nice because we got to just basically double our business, but it felt like less pressure because, there was 2 of us. I mean, divide and conquer, right? So when Andy joined, like we had this team within our brokerage, but it's just, we were doing all of our own thing. Like we were doing our own website, doing our own, CRM, doing our own marketing. I actually early on had an article about me. I was interviewed in Illinois Realtor magazine because of my success with social media, because that's where I attributed like majority of my, growth from, like just posting on Facebook and getting all these people I went to high school with, I haven't talked to in a decade, that are like, hey, I see you're in real estate, like help me buy a house. So we just kind of were looking at, we're paying in to a name. And at this point in my career where we've built it to, we're getting all referral. I'm like, no one even cares or asks what brokerage we're with. And I feel like that is a shift and that's still continuing on. And I think a lot of agents would agree with that, which is why like a lot of boutique brokerages are doing really well, because at the end of the day, it's like they're hiring me and my team and what I'm going to do. They're really not like caring what brokerage my name and my license are under. So it was just kind of a way to like do things our own way, obviously always entrepreneurial. So I was like, why not just add this to the mix and just start our own, and just, make it what we wanted to make it, and not, I didn't want to buy into a corporate franchise because then you have to follow corporate franchise rules. I'm like, I want to be the rule maker, like I want to do things the way that we envision doing them and not the way that someone else is telling me to do it. So I kind of like to do my own thing, if you can't tell.
Yeah, I think that's coming across. So that's okay though. What year was this that you guys made this decision?
So it was in 2017. So it's been a while. At the time, my oldest daughter was like 2 years old. It was probably the most intense years of my life because, I was still a very active agent selling. Then, meanwhile, trying to stand up the whole brokerage, working on all of that, our operations. Then, you start hiring agents. Then you're helping your agents. They need assistance. And obviously, there's a lot more to running a business and a brokerage than just that. It's beyond real estate, right? You've got to, do all your accounting. You've got to be processing files, marketing. There's just like a lot that goes into it. So I actually probably only 2 or 3 years in, I stopped selling because part of it was like, okay, if we're going to grow, we could stay a small brokerage, do our own thing. Like if we want to grow and, hire more people, I like the fact that I could just be there to help them and not, my whole thing is like, I'm not going to compete with you. So I don't ever want agents to feel like they're uncomfortable asking for advice or whatnot, because I'm not marketing myself, and a lot of it for me, like family life too, it's a demanding schedule, as you know, for a real estate agent. So a lot of it is nice that I also can have my business hours. Obviously, I'm helping, agents taking random phone calls, but it's not like I'm out doing a listing appointment on a Sunday evening. I could be with my family. So it's kind of a win-win, and it's really helped me to focus my energies on the brokerage rather than on deals, because it's a lot to juggle. I honestly, and with all these changes, perfect segue, because it gives me the ability to be able to stay current on all of this. Because we actually just had Main Street come in and she was speaking about it, which we're already totally informed, and I've been on top of it, of all these changes. But she's like, there's brokerages that I visit that some people don't even know that this is happening, and this is the first they're literally hearing about these lawsuits that have been going on for a couple of years. And I'm like, well, not me.
Right.
So
Right.
it's important. There's a lot of changing. There's a lot of shifting. There's just a lot of moving parts to stay. The learning never stops, right? You could you pass the class, but then it's laws change, paperwork changes, policies change. There is just change. If you don't like change, then probably don't get into real estate, because it is constantly evolving and changing, which I think is exciting. I find I like a challenge. So I think that the constant evolution of our job is an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity, not as a hindrance.
Well, I would say that's a great attitude, because I certainly remember the people that I started with, 29 years ago, that we didn't use computers when I started. It came in about a year and a half later, right? And there were people like, I'm never going to use a computer. We don't need to use a computer. They're so used to doing it the old way with their little index cards of everybody and all this stuff. And, a lot of those people were out of the business within 5 years after that happening.
Yep. And I hate to say it, but we're going to see that now. It's just the same thing there's a lot going on. And I'm already seeing, we talked about this. There was a lot of agents already this year who have just got out of the business because it's just, yes, it's hard to shift and to change, but you can also make it a good thing, which is what I'm focusing on with this whole change, because I do think there has been a lack of education of the general public of what we do. People think that we are rolling in the dough, which is so far from the truth, because, I've always explained that to my clients, because I just think that it's just transparency. I just believe in transparency. And it's I don't want them to think, oh my gosh, she's barely doing anything and, she's making this huge check. I've always explained that, out of our check, we're independent contractors. So goodbye 25% going to the IRS. And then we pay for all the marketing. We have to pay our professional licensing fees. It's probably what, like $1,500 a year to just have a license. You have to pay the state. Brokerages have fees. Then, your broker takes a cut. Then there's agents that pay for things on their own. Some agents, if their brokerage doesn't offer it, that, you're paying for a website, you're paying for electronic signature to make it easier for your clients. Like there's just so much that we pay for. And it's like, we're left with, I hate to call it peanuts at the end of the day, but you have to do a decent amount of business. And I don't think like the general public really understands the toll it takes on us, but also like the volume and how busy you are trying to make that living. I know you explain that really well to your students, like the 100 grand example, and like you totally could do it, but guess what? You're going to have to like dedicate. I mean, it's not just like, oh, a part-time, you're sitting by the pool, your phone's ringing. Like it's a hustle, it's a grind.
Well, come on, Ashley, all those people on TV, don't you see how much money they're making up there in the right-hand corner with all their commissions? And look how they live. I mean, come on, that's all of you, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because literally when I interview people, I cannot tell you how many people get into real estate. And I always ask why, like what caused you to get into classes? And it's always, I watch HGTV. I love it. And that's exactly my first thing that I tell them is, well, it's nothing like that. I mean, of course you have obviously wonderful clients that are decisive, but you'll have clients that you're working with for 8-9 months that are, telling you, I want this, but then they're looking at this because they get desperate. There's just so much more that goes into it. I think until people are actually in real estate, they really don't understand. And I feel like that needs to be a lot of the shift of hopefully what comes out of all of this is that there's just more transparency for the public, because at the end of the day, I mean, there's a lot of other professions that get paid on commission. We were talking about this with like car sales, your commission, car salesman, that is all rolled into what you're paying for the car. Like that's basically, essentially like how it's rolled into what we're paying for houses. And back when there was no buyer's agent, because we talked about this a lot when I've gone to a couple managing broker breakfasts and things and trainings that I've attended. And that was why there was a shift, because back when there was only listing agents, the buyer really didn't have like good representation. So, how can the listing agent effectively represent both sides? Even dual agency, I personally hate it because it's just uncomfortable. And it's like, you almost feel like you're just doing a disservice to both sides because you have to stay so neutral that, like, imagine a first-time buyer and dual agency. Like I tell the agents all the time, I'm like, listen, a lot of states don't allow it. And if you, if it's like a family member or somebody, like they're going to want your 100% representation. So I would just say, no, like you're not comfortable with it. Like that is okay. And a first-time buyer, I think that would be really hard for them to be represented dually, because you just can't give effective advice when you're also trying to represent the best interests of the seller. So I think that's why, buyer's agents came about. And I do think that buyer's agents play such an important role. And it's like, it's interesting to me that it is being questioned, but I could definitely see where there are a lot of people in our industry, because sadly, I do, almost on a daily basis see a lack of ethics and morals. And sadly, there are a portion of people in our industry that give real estate agents a bad name. I mean, I even recently, I've had agents call me where a buyer's agent gives a lockbox code out, which is insane that anyone would do that and think that that's okay. And then, I get on the phone, call the other managing broker. I'm like, hey, I just, I want to let you know, like, this has happened. Of course, managing broker sticks up for their agent until I call them back and say, so there's a Ring doorbell. And so, obviously you always want to assume nowadays you are being recorded from somewhere, whether it's in the house, whether it's outside the house. So there's literally video footage of no buyer's agent and a buyer typing in a code. So things like that, it's just so hard because it gives us such a bad name. And then you have people that do real estate on the side and they do a couple deals a year. honestly, if they're not in it full time with all these changes, they're not going to be on top of what's going on and what the changes are and what the new paperwork is and things like that. So it is challenging because there's such a smaller percentage of us, I feel like, that do this full time as a career versus like maybe it's just not a main focus and you do a couple deals a year. It's still super important to stay on top of what's going on, because how could you be effective in your role if you're not on top of, the changes and the guidelines that you're supposed to follow? But it's hard. I think it's a lack of education. I think it's just a lack of understanding how we get paid. I do think that there should be more transparency with that, because like I said, I don't think it's that crazy when you compare it to like other industries. It's just like the microscope is literally on us right now, on real estate agents. But I don't see buyer's agents going away. Do you? I think like they're kind of important.
Well, speaking as a guy who worked for the first 6 years under the common law of agency, which is that anybody who was licensed in the transaction, because the seller paid the commission, they all work for the seller. So the buyer really never had anybody that was 100% representing them, because if the buyer told you something, you would have to tell the other side, because technically you represent the seller, because you're taking the commission that was the genesis of which was the seller. So, those first 6 years, I rarely did buyers at all. I mean, I was lucky that I was doing more and more seller stuff based on the type of business I was in. But with the change in 2000 of the statutory law of agency, which then creates the two, we got a seller's agent, a buyer's agent, and each work 100% for their client. I thought that was an amazing change for the buyers, because it gave them somebody that they could confide in and that they could really count on to represent them. So, I don't think it's something that should go away, because if it does, it would be to the detriment of buyers. I believe that. Buyers need totally as much help.
They really do. And honestly, it's, when you've been doing this for a long time, it's like, obviously we have our experience and everything, but I deal so much with either new agents or even just like buyers and sellers. You forget how much they don't know. And I feel like some agents, if they're like, oh, well, this is how this works, this is that, and like gloss over it, they don't know. So it's like you have to like really try to put yourself in their shoes. But I think that a lot of sellers might feel like, oh, well, buyer's agents, they're just going to negotiate against me. They're just going to do this. I think what people really need to think about is that we, in a good partnership, a buyer's agent, a listing agent, we are really working together, because everybody, buyer, seller, buyer's agent, seller's agent, brokerages, we want to see the transaction come to a close. And so all parties are happy, right? So there's been times like I had a deal years ago and we presented the offer, for my buyer, and the listing agent was, oh, it's not going to appraise this and that. So they weren't going to accept our offer, but it was multiple offers. So then, essentially I convinced them as the buyer's agent. I said, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we have the appraisal immediately up front? And then if it doesn't appraise, if you're correct and it's not going to appraise, then, we'll reimburse whatever. So we had this whole thing worked out. So it's like, I wasn't necessarily, it's not like I'm working against either party. It's like we were coming up with a solution and being creative to keep a deal together. So I just don't think that, sellers should think of it that way, that we're trying to like work against them and get every penny and this and that, because a lot of times, like we said, we're just facilitating a transaction, and we're sort of, we've seen a lot of these things. Like if I've seen a certain thing be negotiated before or some creative solution, then you can bring that experience, and then otherwise that transaction might never come to fruition.
100%. Hey there, Real Estate Roundtable podcast listeners. I want to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, I Love Real Estate School. If you're looking to get your real estate license or fulfilling your continuing education requirements, I Love Real Estate School's got you covered. As an Illinois licensed school, they offer the state-required broker pre-license course, managing broker pre-license courses, post-licensing courses, and continuing education. And the best part, you can take the courses either through their live stream with a live instructor or online home study. So no matter where you are, you can get the education you need to take your real estate career to the next level. I Love Real Estate School is committed to helping you succeed in the industry. That's why they offer comprehensive, high-quality education at an affordable price. So, if you're ready to start your real estate journey or stay up to date with your continuing education, head on over to iloverealestateschool.com today to learn more. So let's talk specifically, first of all, about the lawsuit and the result of the lawsuit. So why don't you fill our listeners in terms of, how that started and how we got to where we are right now?
So, I mean, it's been going on, I think, for longer than people might realize. I've been on top of it. I've been attending the trainings, listening to as much as I can. There's so many lawsuits going on right now, but essentially as a whole, I just feel like real estate is just under the microscope. So, buyers are looking at, are the prices inflated because our commissions are included in that? Sellers are looking at it as, we're forced to pay a buyer's fee, which in all reality, it's, yes, you had to fill something in the field, but it could have been $1. So I think, in my opinion, a lot of it comes down to, again, like education. So as an agent, if I'm sitting down with a seller, of course, I want to go through the paperwork, but I don't think that every agent necessarily does that. Which, again, we could say this for a lot of different industries, because when you're signing all these papers at a doctor's office, are you reading all the fine print? Probably not. But I think in general, a lot of agents might gloss over that. I don't know, again, this was in another state, right? So like, I'm only speaking to my paperwork here in Illinois. Which I do think that our association does a phenomenal job with, revising paperwork, staying on top of the changes. It is all broken down. So you could see the total commission. You could see how the commission is divvied out. I just think that a lot of that sellers maybe weren't understanding. Again, I can't speak to how, in other states, how theirs all works, but I just think that in general, they were not being educated on how the commissions are paid. And, previously, before our code of ethics made the change, buyer's agents would also say, my services to you are free, which we are no longer allowed to say per the code of ethics, because it is misleading, because technically it's not free, because hypothetically the buyer is the one bringing the money, right? So the buyer is essentially, paying part of it, but also on the listing side, the commission's being divvied out. So I just think that, again, it's a lot. I really think what's going on is an education issue and a transparency issue. So I don't know how it's all going to play out. I mean, obviously these appeals could take years. But I just think if you look at the way other industries work, we're not the only ones who have commissions in the price you're paying. There's a lot of different industries this way. We talked about insurance agents make percentages, car salesmen make percentages, that's part of what you're paying. And then there's a commission paid out of that. So it's not like this is specific to only real estate. I don't think we're going to see buyer's agents go away. So I think that for me, I'm taking this as an opportunity, which I've always explained it well. And I'm just telling my agents, like, let's explain this, as well as we can. Let's make sure that when you go into a listing, because at the end of the day, sellers don't have to hire us, right? They could say, I'm going to sell for sale by owner. I don't want to pay an agent. Great. If I say, here's my services and my commission rate, and this is how I do it, they have the ability to interview multiple agents, which most of them do. So if they make the decision, and obviously the one thing we talked about with Main Street is that we can present data. So not saying, obviously there is no standard commission. No one should ever say that there is, because there is not. It's always negotiable. There's always situations where you negotiate. But at the end of the day, there's always situations where, you're going to negotiate, and I mean, I do hear people say that the word standard, right? Like we've heard people say that. So I just think overall like a shift needs to happen. I think it'll be for the, betterment of our whole industry. I hope. I don't know how much more accountability we have for training, because I know that, they made a change where managing brokers do have to be more responsible for their agents before they've, completed their course and everything. So, I mean, you have to be involved. It's hard to really pinpoint how it got so bad. But I think that clients have just enough information now available to them that it's like it's enough information on the internet to be dangerous to think that they know everything that goes into a transaction. So I really think that like we just all need to communicate the message and really get the message out there of how compensation works, which the National Association of Realtors actually just shared a video this morning. They put a great video out, and it's like kind of like an explainer that you could send to clients, share on social media. Like, I think that needs to be the focus. I think you obviously don't want sellers and buyers to feel like they're having, something like the wool pulled over their eyes, or they're being taken advantage of in any way. Like, if they are getting into a contract with you, like, I want them to fully understand how it works, how I get paid. As a buyer's agent, I've always told people and been very upfront, listen, I don't get paid unless this closes. So I'm not saying that. I tell them up front, I'm never going to push you into a transaction. Obviously, I want you to be happy, because for me, if you're happy, you'll refer future business to me. So, I don't ever want you to think this. I'm going to give you advice based on the market. So I'm going to tell you now, before we look at houses, that here's the market condition, right? Like, we're in a hot market. You just need to be prepared. There's probably going to be multiple offers. You might have to go above asking. I like to tell them that before, because if we're at a property and then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, well, you have to do this and this and this, then it feels like you're pressuring them. So I just think that sitting down with the buyer, don't meet them for the first time at a property and say like, oh, hi, let's go through. Sit them down and go through buyer agency, which the buyer agency agreement, it is a perfect opportunity to do that and explain to them. Because I mean, people ask us all the time, so at your brokerage, can you only show your brokerage's listings? So I have to explain, no, we can show any brokerage's listing. So I would exclusively represent you as the buyer, and I get paid at closing from the commission that is shared from the listing agent. So you're not paying me just to talk to me, because sometimes people think they have to pay us if they just ask us a question. But just explaining to them, this is how it works. And I've always done that, because why shouldn't they know? Because then it sets the tone for the whole transaction. Because some agents will get annoyed. Oh my gosh, they're asking me to see this in an hour. Well, did you sit down with them and set the expectation? Explain how showings work. Explain that sellers need to prepare their property. Let them know that you may need 24 hours notice. If you don't sit down and explain, the process, then of course it's going to lead to frustration. And I mean, we've all experienced that. So I think just having the buyer and the seller really, really educated about our process is key. It's crucial.
Well, and so you've sort of hit a nerve with me, because that's been one of my pet peeves easily for the last probably 10 years, is that, especially since I've worked in other states where they always use a buyer agency agreement, that here in Illinois, we're sort of special. That some people are like, well, I don't need to use the buyer's agent. Buyers don't like buyer agency agreements, and on and on and on and all that stuff. And it just annoys me, because that is, in my mind, the person, that broker themselves, saying, I don't believe I bring enough value to the transaction to ask you to sign a document that says you're going to work with me exclusively. And you have to admit, there's a majority of agents that don't use, or previously didn't use, a buyer agency agreement. All right. And so if there's an upside, in my mind, to any of this, it's that you're going to have, as a buyer's agent, you're going to have to talk about it now, and you're going to have to take people through, and you're going to have to educate them on what you bring to the transaction. And once you do, if they agree to work with you, then they're good. They understand what they're bringing to the table. Should the seller choose not to offer a co-broke fee, right?
Mm-hmm. And we should have been having this conversation all along. So I agree with that. I think that it is going to force the conversation. At the end of the day, I think what's hard for agents, which I can fully understand, is that just like some agents, their business model might be, I'll show somebody one house and then I'll ask for a pre-approval. As to where a lot of agents, they might say, I will, as long as you're across the board doing everything the same for everybody, no special treatment, no discrimination. But if you're like, hey, I require a pre-approval, makes sense. But there's people that do business differently. So I think that what's hard, the sticking point for the buyer's agency agreements is that if not everyone is using them, then, I've had people in the past, like the public, if I ask them for a pre-approval, they're like, oh, nice try. You're not getting my information. So it's just like, again, they don't understand that. So that's what's really hard, because then if they call up this agent's willing to just work with them and not make them sign, because it's scary. I totally understand it from a buyer's perspective. It's scary to like lock in with somebody that maybe isn't going to be a great agent. But I think it's important to know that both parties can cancel that agreement. It's an agreement between two parties. But at the same time, also, if a buyer kind of puts themselves in our shoes, is that if I'm like spending an entire Saturday away from my family, setting up 8 showings, the absolute worst thing for me is like, I give up that time and my gas and my energy and everything. And then I hear, oh, we went with another agent and did something. So it's almost discouraging. And I almost feel like if buyers can like see it in that way, then we are going to be so committed, because we know like, hey, I mean, nobody wants to work for free. I don't care what industry you're in, who's going to want to do a bunch of work and literally get no money. I mean, it's not fun. So I think that, again, just educating them on what we do. I mean, I think that buyers agents are so valuable, because can you imagine as a buyer, when we're sitting there, like mapping out all of these showings and taking them here, and like even networking with local agents, right? Like if I have an agent or a client who's like, I really want to be in this city. And then I'm like, oh, I know like these couple agents, and they're like, oh, I've got this coming up, whatever. We bring a lot of value. I can't imagine a buyer, let alone a first-time buyer, sitting there trying to keep track of, okay, I called this agent for this property and this agent, and trying to time it out and trying to go there and trying to keep track of what they're looking at, and then trying to like negotiate their own deal. Because then if there's an agent representation on that side, they're going to be, totally having the upper hand. If this first time buyer, I mean, let's be honest, like they're going to be the ones that are going to really, really suffer, as like the first time buyers that really don't know the process at all. I mean, they're some of my favorite clients to work with, because it's like, I can help you. Like, I can explain this to you. I'll help you achieve this huge goal of yours. Like, it's super rewarding. I honestly could not see a lot of them doing it on their own, because it is a lot. It's very challenging. So,
well, I mean, we've certainly met people that can do it on their own. There's percentage wise, though, it's a very small percentage that could get through it on their own and do it as successfully or better than if they were being represented by an agent, a broker here in Illinois. Right. The vast majority, and by the way, that's no knock on anybody. I often tell my students, before I got into real estate, I was in a whole different industry. I knew nothing about real estate, nothing. And so anybody, if you left it up to me, who knows what I would have done. I mean, my wife said to me before we got into real estate, we should think about buying a house. And I said, okay. We pay $1,000 a month in rent. She's like, right. So how much house do you think we should buy? I said, $360,000. Because it's $1,000 a month for 30 years. In my mind, that was $360,000. I had no clue, right? I was an expert in my business. I went to college, all that stuff. I didn't know how it worked. No idea, no clue. So that's the perspective that I take this from, is we're working with people who are really good at what they do, but this isn't what they do. Right?
I mean, I couldn't go sell insurance tomorrow. I couldn't go run somebody's financial portfolio tomorrow. I couldn't, they're just every industry. I mean, that's like literally the value that we bring, is because, I mean, it's such a big transaction. It's such a big risk. You're spending the most money you'll likely ever spend. I feel like for the, small amount that we get for like our expertise, I feel like it's more than valuable. And I think the value is there. I think just our communication of the message of the value is what needs to improve. And I do think it's going to be very challenging. Like I do really feel for brand new agents, even agents that are in the business. I think that gaining that confidence takes time. Like I don't feel like anyone obviously gets licensed right away and they're like, I'm super valuable and I know everything. Like it takes you have to build on your, experience. But I think that's going to be one of the biggest struggles for new agents is to be able to, I mean, they're nervous enough to do a showing, let alone sitting in front of someone who's grilling them about their value. I mean, one of my first listing appointment ever, it was so funny because the seller was like, can I see a list of everything you've sold? And I was like, oh. So luckily I was actually co-listing it with my family member. He'd been in, my uncle was in real estate for a long time. So, he obviously had the track record, but like, I just can't see that's going to be really a challenge for somebody brand new, who in the industry to get confident enough like that quickly to be able to, back up all their value and everything they bring to the table. But it's training, experience, but it takes the right personality.
Oh, for sure. And here's the other thing, though, and I was just having this conversation with a class the other day, is it's real simple. They aren't alone. They got you. I mean, when somebody says, what's your value? Well, me and my team, because I'm not alone, I got my DMB, and she's going to help me with this, right? And so there is experience within that DMB, which is one of the reasons I certainly think they made the change in 2020 to make that DMB be involved in all of these deals until the person hits, until they take the 45-hour post license class. So I do think that there's value in taking credit for what the group has done, what your manager's done, because you're not alone, right? And
Absolutely.
And in an office like yours, where you're as hands-on as you are, that's a huge benefit to somebody coming to your office versus, and I'm not knocking all the big guys, but somebody who's got a 1,500 person office, there's one guy or one
Right.
woman. That's it, and that's the difference. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the paperwork, because there's been some changes in the paperwork that kicked in, October 1st? Or was it November?
Well, we actually, when one of the first like verdicts or whatever, because basically the way that it's all progressed, it was a couple months ago, actually, when the private network was able to go to zero. So people were, freaking out about that. I mean, the trainer from Main Street, literally when she was here, said that she had people in offices. She was just like giving the information. They were screaming at her. So that was like a whole big thing. And guess what? How many zeros have we seen? Really not that many, because I think that the listing agents are communicating that to their sellers. So basically when the first verdict came out, our association, I'm part of Main Street Association. Obviously, we have multiple associations around the Chicagoland area. I mean, we're one of the biggest. MRED is a very big MLS. So ours specifically is all I could speak to, but we had changes made right away in the compensation section. So it's very, very broken out that it literally says like, here's the total commission percent, flat fee, whatever. Here's how it's broken down, the listing brokerage, this amount, and then the buyer's brokerage, if there is one, that can still be the listing brokerage, because obviously if we are a dual agent, if we do both sides, whatever it may be. So it's very, very broken down. So I think it makes it a lot easier for the agents to have that conversation. But I think in general that it's a lot of agents struggle with the compensation discussion and like to get nervous when they get to that section, because a lot of it, I think, is just a confidence thing and not like seeing the value. So I like a lot of those charts they have out there where it kind of shows like the overlap, like, here's the total commission. Here's the listing brokerage, buyer's brokerage, the split that the listing brokerage shares with the listing agent, the split that the buyer's brokerage shares with and then, all the other things that come out of it. I think it's good to illustrate that. But I think in general, I like the way that the paperwork has kind of evolved in our area to break that down further. Because then as of October 31st, that is when the rest of the MLS went to the zero compensation. Like, again, previously it was $1, right? So you could technically have put in there $1 and that would have been valid. So now it's zero. And I don't expect that we're going to see a bunch of zeros, because I feel like as long as you explain to a seller, here's why it is in your best interest to have a, buyer's brokerage. Like, because at the end of the day, I've been doing this long enough. You've been doing this long enough. Dual agency is like not super common. Most of the time when you list a property, barely ever are you the one showing it. It's like you're going to have people from all these other brokerages that have their buyers that maybe they've been looking in the area for a long time. So I think that's like the part of it, that buyers brokers are a lot more involved sometimes than sellers might think. They might have been helping this buyer for 6 to 8 months looking in this specific area. Their listing comes up, it's perfect. They bring them through. And so it is to their advantage. I do think that a seller, by not offering anything, could potentially be hurting their home sale, because, we talked about this in our office. Like, think about VA loans. A veteran, like, they cannot pay any of those fees. So they couldn't pay a buyer's broker's commission. Right now, we can't roll it into a loan. We've been talking to lenders about this like crazy. So by all means, if anybody out there knows of anything, let us know. But all the lenders that I've spoken with, we can negotiate a closing cost credit. But that's really, right now, I think we might see that shift, if obviously with all of this going on. Like, I think that there might be a shift in that, because how many, like, a first-time FHA buyer that's barely getting a down payment together can afford, oh yeah, let me just add commission onto that because there's no commission being offered. It's really going to hurt our industry, and it's going to hurt like the most vulnerable buyers.
Yep. Well, and here's the other thing too, is as you're talking about this, I still think that the listing broker, their language needs to be very specific in light of the whole, antitrust thing. And, certainly I've already heard people saying, well, I'm just going to tell my seller that, if they don't offer it, nobody's going to show their house, which is sort of along the lines of what they were just accusing us of. Right.
And I mean, obviously, no matter what, we have to work in our buyer's best interest. I mean, that absolutely. I mean, are there agents that would do that? I feel like there's agents that break a lot of rules. Obviously, I would never do something like that. I think that.
Well, but
really
hang on, Ash. What I'm talking about is the listing agent. And if I'm having a conversation with you as my seller, and I say, Ashley, I charge 6%. Let's use the number everybody's always. By the way, I've always charged 6%. So just so you know, for myself. Okay. But out of that 6%, I'm going to suggest we're going to pay 2.5% to a buyer's agent who will bring us a buyer. Right. So I will explain the benefit of that to my seller client. But if I were to say to you, Ashley, if you don't offer the 2.5 or the 2 or whatever number you negotiate, or you're trying to negotiate into this, that other brokers aren't going to show your property. I think that's the wrong message to a seller.
Oh, for sure. For sure. That's terrible. I think what you should do personally, I think you bring a buyer's agency agreement, and I think you walk through it with the seller and you show the seller and talk about the buyer's agent role, because then I think it makes it more like they'll be more aware of why it makes sense to offer that. And as well as showing them data, there's nothing wrong. Like, our commissions now are public, so pull it up and show what has been paid out. But I think just like explaining to the seller the role of the buyer's agent, saying that, listen, if buyers are in this agreement and they don't have the funds to bring to the table, they make a choice. Obviously, a buyer can make a choice and say, okay, well, this one is offering zero compensation. We signed a buyer agency agreement for X compensation. let's just take it off the list because, I don't have the funds to, 100%. I think just explaining that to a seller, but then also explaining to them what goes into being a buyer's agent. Because most agents, obviously some specialize in listings, specialize in buyers. A lot of agents kind of teeter back and forth, right? So put on your buyer's agent hat and explain to the seller what your role is like as a buyer's agent. Because again, people do not understand what we deal with, and they don't understand what our role is. And so how, as a buyer's agent, if you're a good buyer's agent, you're out there. I tell my agents, like, search some new construction. How many times have I brought people and I'm like, listen, there's this great opportunity. Here's what you could do. You bring them different options, right? And I'm spending my weekend showing them properties. I might have been working with them for 8 months before I get to your listing. Your listing might be perfect. I might bring that up to them. So if you're not offering anything and they don't have the funds to pay, that very well could hurt the potential pool of buyers. And I think, ultimately what I would love to see, I feel like dual agency, like I almost like wish that we didn't offer it here, that like you just couldn't do it, because then you either have a listing agent representation as a seller, you either have a buyer's agent representation or no representation. Because I personally think like there's so much conflict that you could do it right, but I feel like it's very hard. I've been involved in several. It's just always uncomfortable. It's just always like you just don't feel like you're giving them, which you're not, like you're really just in between. But also the buyer's agency should become like hopefully part of license law. Because then if everybody does it and we're required to do it and we all are making the same disclosure and we're all entering, just like we enter into listing agreements, we're entering into buyer agreements. I just think it's like gotta be an all or nothing shift, because otherwise you're never going to get everybody on board, because you're always going to have agents who are going to be like, oh, I'm not going to use it. So then it creates a trust issue. And it's like, people don't trust us. So when I'm like, hey, sit down and sign this and you're committed to me. And again, if I'm not explaining the listing paperwork well enough, you better hope I'm explaining the buyer's agency agreement well enough that, it's easy to understand. If people don't even trust us to give us a pre-approval, it's hard to explain, why they're signing this, why this is in your benefit, what we're going to do for you.
Right. But I think that's a matter of practice with people, because again, in other states, brokers in other states, whenever I talk to somebody from like Texas and I talk about buyer agency agreement, they go, oh yeah, we always use them. Mm-hmm. Everybody uses it always. And you got to say, like you say, why isn't it something that everybody in Illinois always uses? And it's because we've had the ability to choose to use it or not. I think a lot of companies don't train their people well. They will now, but they haven't in the past trained their people on how to actually present this and walk people through it, right? And sure. And this always kills me. The kicker to this is almost every company requires that when you work with a buyer, to be paid to get your commission from your company, that you have a buyer's agency agreement in the file. And they would teach their people to get that at closing. Just put it in with all the paperwork at closing because it's already done. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. It didn't protect you at all. But yet, that's how they did it. They trained their people to do that, which, is ridiculous to me, because you're a professional. You should know you're being paid to do the work that you're going to do. If somebody's embarrassed about telling people that they got into this business because they want to make money, then you probably shouldn't be in the business.
For sure. Yeah.
Right?
I know it's like hard to talk about for some people, but yeah, essentially, like real estate agents got to pay their bills. They got to pay for their groceries just like everybody else. So, we're not doing this for free. And It also bugs me because I feel like in a situation, again, we're just under the microscope right now because obviously there's a lot of other industries that like you could go after with similar issues. But in a transaction, I feel like a lot of times we are taking the brunt of like, how many times have you seen a situation? Oh, well, let's just, cut the commission, just do this, just cut this. And it's like every single time, oh, we're just going to throw this in. I mean, that's just making the margins even smaller. And again, just not understanding like what is really going into that with everything else that we're still paying for to just even keep our license, to keep ourselves afloat in the business. It costs money. So yes, we should be compensated. And I mean, I would argue in a lot of industries, like it's just a mindset, but like if someone is like doing my hair, I of course would expect that they would be compensated. If someone is doing some other business or service for me, of course I, want them to be compensated for their time and their expertise. So it's like, I don't know why people don't think we should.
Well, I mean, and, certainly in the past, real estate agents have had a bad rap, and probably some of it was well earned in terms of taking advantage of their clients, in terms of having knowledge that they didn't have, and you're the expert, and why didn't you tell me, and all that. But I certainly think over the time that I've been doing this, due primarily to technology, that the public has so much access to information, from everywhere, good, bad, or indifferent, that, it's more and more that you need to educate people. And so they understand. And it's not like agents are getting away with stuff that they were in the past. There's just too many other resources that people can use to sort, and laws to hold our industry accountable. And so,
Yeah, I agree. I think now, obviously with it being in the headlines, that message is more important than ever, right? Because a lot of people are going to like hear about it and think about it. And then of course they're going to question their own situation. So I think more than ever, we need to go into every interaction completely prepared to talk about this. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of agents, like a big portion of agents that just want to kind of like, like, oh, like this isn't happening, but like it's happening. It's here. Let's deal with it. Let's spin it into a positive, right? Like I always talk about building trust. I don't care what sales industry you're in. It's not just real estate. You could be selling whatever door to door. Sales is all about being authentic and building trust. So even if you're walking through a house with someone and you're pointing out a crack in the ceiling, you're building trust, right? Like, I think that this could be used to an agent's advantage personally, that lay it out there. Don't try to like avoid it. If you go to a listing appointment, bring it up and say, I know that you might have heard there are some things going on in our industry. I just want to let you know, I want to be transparent. Here's what's going on. There was a lot of discussion about compensation and the way that agents are paid. So like talk about that, have your pitch ready to go, because chances are, I know a lot of agents really said they haven't been asked about it yet, but I think the more like coverage it gets, and now with more, I mean, it's like every day you're hearing about like a new lawsuit. So as an agent, I think the best thing that you could do right now is to have your commentary and your elevator speech basically prepared so that you can go in very confident. And I think by like spending that time to really, really explain it, think of like a listing appointment. If two agents go in there and they just kind of gloss over and don't really talk about it, maybe the seller hears about it, and then you come in and you're like full transparent, listen, I feel like that's going to go over like really well for you. I think that's going to build trust. I think if we all did that, I think it's going to make our whole industry just a lot better, because we do have a bad rep. Like, I wish we didn't, but I think we can make it better. I think this is the opportunity to make it better.
Right. And, here's the other thing. When we talk about those TV shows, they never show people, they show them negotiating. They show them selling and having their little parties and all their angst, but they never really show them walking through the agreement with somebody, because it's boring on TV, right? But if they did, people might get a better sense of how this really works. I mean, all those guys selling the $1 million or multi-million dollar places, they have to go through the same process. They're just not showing it to you. That's the difference in this. So how have you been, training your people? What kind of things have you done for your brokerage to address this?
So we've just been really trying to focus on our social media marketing with it all, because I think, again, people are getting this message, so I want to like keep putting the message out. Here's the value of a buyer's agent. Here's what we bring to the table. I think just also, we've been trying to do more and more like, let's talk about this. Let's have a roundtable. We've had a couple different agent panels and discussions, because I mean, obviously no one can really predict like where this is going to go, but based on what I'm seeing, I really think it's like our value proposition is under attack. So I think, how can we beef up our value proposition? And I just think so many agents don't even take the time to do a buyer consult. I think it is the smartest thing. Take 30 minutes at Starbucks, do a Zoom if you can't meet, do an iPhone meeting, do whatever, because not only like the compensation part of it, obviously it's a big piece, but you're just going to save yourself like such a headache by setting expectations. I mean, I set expectations with agents that we hire, I mean, I think I love your example I always give about new agents interviewing with, different size brokerages. So I set expectations with my agents. You should also set expectations with your sellers, set expectations with your buyers. It's pretty simple, because then you're all on the same page. You're working as a team. I just think communication is like so important in our industry. I think we need to clearly communicate. I think that is how so many issues arise, honestly, because either agents have bad communication, an agent and a client have bad communication, whatever it may be. I feel like all the issues, because obviously as a brokerage owner, like I'm getting all the issues. So it's like I'm seeing a lot of things. It just like so much of it comes back to like a breakdown in communication. So really that's my focus, just go out there and spin this into a positive as much as you can, right? I feel like to be successful, you just have to be an eternal optimist. There's nothing that we can do to change it. So why be doom and gloom and dwell on it? I mean, get out there and sell it. You still should be setting listing appointments. You should just be prepared to address it. I think preparation, and really I've been doing it this way all along, explaining. And that's how I always train the agents, is to explain, never just send them something and say, sign this.
Right.
So I really think that's kind of our message. I don't know, just explain and be transparent.
I think you're doing a great job with regard to that whole issue. And I appreciate the time that you're taking. I just have two more things for you. Number one, I get this question all the time. Now, I happen to know that you have a beautiful family. It's 3 children, 2 girls and a boy.
Yep.
Okay. So, I get a lot of people coming to class. I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I'm in charge of the kids. How can I make real estate work? What's your advice, I guess, or what would you say to somebody that would bring you that concern?
I actually think it's a great industry to be in for, parents of young kids. And it's a lot to juggle, don't get me wrong, but we have somewhat control over our schedule, right? So I always tell agents, rather than saying to your client, when are you available? If you know that you have different family obligations, maybe say, are you available Thursday at 3:00? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yes, I am, So I love that part of it. I always tell the agents, you can kind of sort of have some control. Obviously, yes, it's hard. There's always situations, especially the last couple of years. I mean, I really feel for every buyer's agent out there, because it was like, this is listed, I have to take you immediately. Of course, there's been situations where I've had to like bring my kid. I mean, it happens, and I think that people think that as a real estate agent, we have to be this super professional in a suit, what they see on TV. It's like, you tell your client, I'm just a person too. I mean, if I'm running my kid to ballet and I go and run through and show a house first and bring my kid, obviously there's a time and a place, depending on like how well, your client, you obviously don't want to ever be like unprofessional, but you just have to make it work. As a working parent, you have to make it work. I mean, it's real life. I mean, there's been times that you're on the phone, your kid's screaming in the background, but you get through it, you know? And honestly, I will say, I feel like starting real estate when I was young, I feel like since becoming a mom, it's actually made me a better agent and business owner and everything, because you just get like hyper efficient. And I feel like any parent who juggles like work and kids like can tell you this. It's like you just get hyper efficient. I mean, I can probably accomplish more during like a 2 hour nap time than some people might be able to in like the span of like 2 or 3 days. So I think it's totally doable. Um, I think it's great to set, to be a role model for my kids. And I mean, my kids talk about, real estate all the time. I mean, like even the little ones will pretend they're like on their phone talking about whatever. So I think that's also really cool because I mean, it is hard. Obviously, yes, it takes time away from your family, but at the same time, I was like, look at what like we're modeling to like our kids, our family. Like that's exciting. And I think that maybe they'll be entrepreneurs one day, who knows? But I think, anybody having concerns about that, it's totally doable. You're in control. I mean, if you have a season of life where you need to slow down in real estate a little bit, that's the beauty of our industry. You don't have to take on new clients and be out there doing open houses every weekend. Like, of course, we all go through phases in life. And then maybe in another phase, you're like, okay, I got this next year. My kids are in school, whatever it may be, you can make it work.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you've done a great job doing that for you and your family, which is awesome. And then lastly, so somebody comes to you today thinking about getting into real estate, besides, obviously sending them to our school. What you're going to do, what's your number one piece of advice that you would give brand new person getting into this industry right now?
I think just in general with the new agents, what I see is, consistency is one of like the biggest things, whether it's a skill or a habit or whatever it may be. I feel like you just need to always be consistent, soak it all in. As a new agent, obviously interview different brokerages, see where's a good fit for you. Just because it's a good fit for your friend doesn't mean it's going to be the right fit for you. Obviously, you want support. I think the biggest thing as an agent to understand is that a brokerage is not there to like do it for you, because obviously that's like kind of a misconception. I think people get licensed and I hear it all the time. This is so much harder than I thought. I'm like, it is, it really is. But no brokerage is going to do it for you. You have to be very self-motivated. Know yourself. You have to be very self-aware, because some people, like I am excellent at working at home. Like I will be on the phone with people and I'm putting laundry in, like that's just like, that is my personality. There are people who cannot do that. So you have to be self-aware enough to know yourself, to know if I'm at home, I'm going to get distracted. So maybe I need to go into my office, or I need to go work at a coffee shop to get things done. That's a big part of it, because there is an 87% failure rate. I don't know if that's like a current figure, but that's the one that I've always heard is 87% get out of the business. And I mean, over the last 6 years, I've seen a lot come and go. I just think consistency, you can't just market yourself one time. Hey, I passed the test, call me, and then call it a day. It's a grind. It's social media in itself, it's exhausting. You got to constantly be in front of people. Even if you're having like two people, it's your mom and your grandma liking your post, people are seeing it. So it will over time grow. And then just being consistent and following up, just getting referrals, following up. It's like a snowball, right? It's not the sprint, it's the marathon. You have to just do a little bit at a time to grow your business. I know sometimes it seems impossible. And I know like we just have this society where we just like want instant gratification, but that is usually not what we get from this industry. But like, I will say the payoff is totally worth it. When you get to the point where you're looking back at when you started real estate and you're like, wow, like I really haven't even been doing a ton of marketing. I'm so busy. I just keep getting referral calls. I mean, that is like the sweet spot. Like that is where you're going to look back and say, that was all worth it. All of that stress of building myself up, like it was all worth it to get to that point, because like you will, if you're consistent, you don't have to be the best salesperson. It's consistency.
Well, that's great advice. I think that again, people come into this business with unrealistic expectations. And, I always tell students, spend time educating yourself on the business, in the business, take as much, as many seminars, webinars, trainings that you can up front. And sometimes do them multiple times because it's not going to stick the first time,
Totally.
especially if you're not doing it day to day, right? So, I think that we are going to see a lot of people bail out of real estate in the next 12 to 18 months. But just like when you got in, the drop from 2008 to the 2013 was like 500,000 agents. And yeah, it was big. And then people like you got in, you learned how to sell in that market. And those are skills you still have today and are obviously benefiting your client base tremendously, as it turns out. And not only your client base, but also the agents in your office. So that's fantastic. I really want to say thanks. Oh, by the way, can I ask, are you willing to have people reach out if they have any questions for you? Can I put your information below our information in the podcast?
Oh, absolutely. I'm an open door. I could talk about this. If anybody wants to chat about buyer agency changes or real estate, I'm your girl.
There you go. Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day with your family to be able to educate me as well as our listeners in terms of what's been going on. And I love your approach to this, Ashley. I think it's one of the reasons that your boutique agency is as successful as it is. And obviously, I want to wish you and Kristen and Andy continued success as we go down this road of real estate together.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's been a fun conversation. So I look forward to the changes. We'll see. I think it's going to be for the best. And you as well. I hope that your school just, remains successful. I think we're still going to see a lot of new people getting into the industry, and it could be a good shift.
Could be a good shift. All right. Thanks so much, Ashley.
All right. You take care.
You too. Thanks again to our sponsor, I Love Real Estate School. Thanks for tuning in to the Real Estate Roundtable podcast. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our amazing guests and you picked up some valuable tips and insights that you can use in your own real estate business. If you liked what you heard today, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more great content in the future. And if you're an agent who's interested in coaching, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me directly through my website, myrealestatessalesmanager.com, or connect with me on social media. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you the next time in the Real Estate Roundtable podcast.